What's your sense? What's keeping leaders awake at night more than anything else? Is it the costs? Is it the uncertainty of the future? Is it the ever-changing technology that's around us? Is it Donald Trump and the tariffs, for example?
Well, it's probably a quantity of all of those things. So is the market complex? Yes, it is. And this year we've probably seen the fastest changing dynamics in subjects like AI that have suddenly become very real. The power of computing, the power of automation.
I think some of the large retailers are starting to do that now, where they're actually buying some of these EV vehicles, and actually the person that's driving it is a old-fashioned words owner haulier, or it's a smaller organisation that they rent the vehicles to allow them to give them the flex within their supply chain.
EV lorries, how can you make a journey of 400 miles there and back, and how are you going to get charged? And actually the industry have done incredibly well. Some have installed chargers and said, well, have opened these up to others in the industry to use them. I think they're still gathering a bit of pace, aren't they, the usage of these facilities. It's very tricky for us all these days when you've got so much information coming in, so many sort of data points, so many snippets of news and changes, that actually stepping back and looking at more of a 2 or 3 year horizon again, something a little bit longer term, sort of rebasing yourself with a framework to make decisions from. So you're getting away from the day-to-day concern of what will next week's cost increases be, what will next month's problem be, more of a what am I trying to achieve over the next 2 or 3 years.
As I always describe to our members, I think the industry looks for certainty and clarity, and that'll drive confidence to invest time as well as money. So what's probably been the biggest learning that you've seen or taken from the last year, in terms of this industry, that you have seen from the actual index and that's been fed back to you? Welcome to Roadway, the podcast, where we explore people, progresses and challenges to this industry. And I'm Richard Smith, and this afternoon it's my great pleasure to be joined by James from Barclays. And this afternoon we will be looking at the Financial Confidence Index, and we'll be talking about technology, what keeps people awake in this industry, where we feel the industry actually is, and also what the medium to long-term view is. So good afternoon, James, and welcome.
Good afternoon. Very pleased to be here.
Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. So the Logistics Confidence Index, just tell us a little bit about what that is and the relevance and value that it, from Barclays' perspective, that it brings.
So I represent the corporate bank. So we bank businesses from 6.5 million turnover upwards, and we are generally industry aligned. So transport logistics, this is the Logistics Confidence Index is a really key part of what we try to do for the industry each year. And it is exactly that. It measures the confidence rather than the factual financial output of the sector. It's 20 questions, and the first 6 make up the actual index year on year. So those 6 questions stay the same every single year, and from it we get a rating for the sector.
And in terms of this year's 2025, I think it's fair to say it was the lowest it's been for a number of years from a confidence perspective. But yeah, at the same time, there was some optimism around the industry. And I certainly know in our role as the RHA, as I go around talking to members of the industry, that whilst there's a challenge there, they still remain reasonably optimistic there's opportunity. What's your take and interpretation of those two apparently contradictory statements that I've just made?
Yeah, they are a bit, aren't they? And I think this is a really interesting thing, because obviously we are measuring confidence in our questions rather than a sort of an aggregation of financial performance. And it's also timing. We survey, we don't stop surveying until we get 100 leaders of the industry have responded. It's done in July and August, typically each year, and then we launch it in September. And I think the timing can be important. So we came off the back of 2024, where we got one of our biggest readings ever, which possibly a slight premium from change of government at the time. And we've come into this year with a very low, reading, actually much lower than all of us thought it would be. So caught us a bit by surprise, and I think probably one of the earlier indexes that we've seen come back with this reading.
And in terms of, if we look to next year and beyond, and every year there's a budget, and we know there's a budget, and there will be a build up to that budget, and there'll be speculation, which affects confidence, which, as I always describe to our members, I think the industry looks for certainty and clarity, and that'll drive confidence to invest time as well as money. What's probably been the biggest learning that you've seen or taken from the last year, in terms of this industry that you have seen from the actual index and that's been fed back to you?
Yeah, so when we sat down to pull together the final report, it was on our minds, as key stakeholders in the industry. We want to be a voice of confidence, and we want to look to growth in the industry, and we generally see the underlying sector performing pretty well. We know we've got a resilient sector that delivers essential services to a whole variety of end markets across the UK and beyond. So it's much more solid than it comes across. But as I said, this is quite this is a voice of 100 leaders in the sector. So our first response is, of course, that this is not wrong. This is how they're feeling, and what our sense was, it's one of frustration, one of they've had a couple of years of hurdles, roadblocks, things to navigate. This year in particular, probably cost. Lots of global conversations, obviously geopolitical issues, trade, tariffs, trading with Europe. There's a lot of stuff to contend with and a lot of really complex issues. But at the heart of it, and I think this really came out in the report, was 88% of clients' number one focus is on cost control and efficiency. So I think what we're dealing with is cost increases coming through, some of which they can pass on, some of which can't. And so we're seeing their forecasts for turnover going up, obviously alongside the inflation, but the expectation of profits being at its lowest level for quite a few years.
And it's interesting. This probably leads us into the next question. Actually, it might even answer it. So, in terms of pressure and the planning for the future, and we have a view from an Irish perspective. Again, going around speaking to our members of all different shapes and sizes, across coaches as well as trucks as well as vans. What's your sense? What's keeping leaders awake at night more than anything else? Is it the costs? Is it the uncertainty of the future? Is it the ever-changing technology that's around us? Is it Donald Trump and the tariffs, for example?
Well, it's probably a quantity of all of those things. So is the market complex? Yes, it is. And this year we've probably seen the fastest changing dynamics in subjects like AI that have suddenly become very real, the power of computing, the power of automation. But we see that ambiguity really, I think, is what's leading to the current thoughts of the day, is what's going to happen next year. If you look at whether you're looking at sort of foreign exchange markets or global demand for trade, or the automotive sector, the starting point, I think, for all of these businesses is what sector are they actually in? So they might be in road haulage, but who are they supplying to? Are they supplying to the automotive sector? Are they supplying to the food and drink sector? And all of those dynamics will be at play because it's hard for a supplier to outperform their end market. And in general, in the UK, we see the underlying economy being more robust than perhaps the press and the negativity, the sentiment that's out there. The sentiment is one of frustration, whereas the underlying performance is more stable than that.
And in terms of, you touched upon it there again, is just the impact of leaving the EU, which was 5 years ago now, 5 years ago. And I think obviously with COVID and that period of time, that in addition to just the Trump tariffs and all that other uncertainty, that's now probably starting to play out more and more. And they're probably starting to see that whilst we are an island, if you look at the way we deal with freight in and out of the borders, 85% of movements into this country are on a foreign haulier, for example, which can further erode UK domestic movements before foreign haulier leaves the country. So from a scenario modelling perspective and try to predict the future, it must be really difficult, and this is the sense we're getting from our members, for them to do that with so many variables. And it's another one that I'd just like to ask your view and comment is, and it's one that I and the RSA feel quite strongly about, is the concern and challenge that the net zero alternative fuels and the different type of technology to move these goods around is actually playing into the industry from a cost perspective as well.
So there's a lot there, Richard, in there, and ambiguity. I think you're looking at a very ambiguous future. So how fast are we moving with EV, HGV lorries? How far How fast are we moving in a whole variety of areas in automation? And whenever we see clients in any sector going into an ambiguous future, you don't know the answer. We could, if you look at the political or the global agenda for next year, there aren't actually currently many major events affecting trade. We've just been through this for foreign exchange, for example, and it's hard to look at next year's calendar and identify what those big events might be. I mean, there is a mid-year review on US tariffs, as we know, in the States, and maybe that'll have an impact, maybe it won't. Or maybe conditions will continue to be quite stable as they are now. Of course, the UK domestic politics or domestic economy is only a small part of the global trading marketplace, and many of our clients in logistics and freight are in some way engaged in more the global than the local domestic market. So it is scenario planning, really. Look at all the possible outcomes, whether you're pitching for new contract or whether you've got tendering or risk of losing something in the year ahead, is sitting down and having that conversation with yourself and with your colleagues and with your management team, and just sort of role playing some of these things out. So looking at each scenario, and you may end up with, say, 3 or 4 core scenarios to look at. But what should each of those mean for you? And lots of operators are very skilled at doing that. If they're bidding for a new contract, they'll know what capacity they need to take on to deliver the contract. They'll look at the working capital implications of that growth. And I think the same is for the downside. So even though there might be more technical, the opportunity may be more complex, whether it's investing in automation or it's looking at a collaborative venture. Standing still in many cases is not an option. So we need to keep looking forward.
I think that's really good. But the last point is a really good point, because I've always found in business that, try to defend the position is difficult, whereas you need to be ambitious. And I think ambition, that ties into the certainty and clarity. It drives that sort of ambition to grow. Are we in danger of seeing a 2 or 3 tier logistics road haulage sector develop? Because obviously scenario planning, looking at adopting AI, having the capital to invest, is potentially the larger operators, or certainly the more business focused businesses that are in this sector. Whereas we know that 85% of the current makeup of this industry is less than 15 trucks, which leads to businesses that don't have back office. Particularly, they rely on information given by ourselves and yourselves in terms of trends and what the options are, and don't have a lot of time to specialise and dwell on specific topics. Do you think we're seeing a 2-tier or 3-tier logistics sector starting to develop in front of us in the UK?
It is a concern across a number of sectors, isn't it? And I know when we had our logistics roundtable dinners earlier this year, that was something that was coming out from operators, was what are the barriers to entry that things like automation and technology are starting to create. And as you say, it is very challenging conditions for smaller operators who've got less levers to pull, less operations to look at, less options, and perhaps less in-house resource. So they'll be talking to their bank, they'll be talking to their accountants and advisors, their financial advisors. They'll be going to industry events and trying to take a bit of a cue from what others are doing and what opportunities are out there. And of course, they will hopefully also be talking to their customers and asking them how they see the year or two ahead and what their customers are asking for, so that they can start to identify their own niche. We see many small, medium-sized operators that have certain niches and areas of expertise that the larger players may or may not have. And so whilst there's some operators looking at scale, you've got others understanding their really clear USP and what they do and how they do it.
And do you sense as well, again, this is from experience of the sector, that the operators are collaborating more than historically, perhaps, where they're genuinely working together? And I'll just unpack that a little bit more. So as an ex-operator from the industry, it's a fiercely competitive industry, as most sectors are. It's a reasonably low margin sector, which drives that type of behaviour. And genuinely, certainly 35 years ago when I started in this sector, collaboration was something, if I'm honest, that the larger operators were forced to do by their customer, because they wanted 2 or 3 different routes to market. Do you sense that there's a genuine spirit of collaboration developing now within the industry over the years because of the challenges around technology, around commercials, around cost pressures?
Collaboration, I think, is a huge opportunity. Obviously, the larger organisations collaborate through M&A. Yeah, they collaborate by buying and selling things and making their business larger. And so they are buying in skills or infrastructure that they then own because they've got the balance sheet and the capability to do it.
Cool.
Smaller or regional operators obviously don't have the financial assets to go and do that. And it's really, really hard. So I think you've got to collaborate with others in other regions or others who've got similar challenges to yourselves or of a similar size of, where you can actually club together. Some of the pallet infrastructure models have shown a bit of a steer in that way, but we were also quite reassured a year ago, or 2 years ago, when we were talking about EV lorries. How can you make a journey of 400 miles there and back, and how are you going to get charged? And actually, the industry have done incredibly well. Some have installed chargers and said, well, have opened these up to others in the industry to use them. I think they're still gathering a bit of pace, aren't they? The usage of these facilities, but it's pretty clear that operators or regional operators are saying, well, we've installed one. If someone comes here, they can use it, and we'll use yours. So I think the industry has done a great job in starting to collaborate on those sort of practical issues. I think automation and warehousing it's going to be really interesting to see how and who starts to unlock that opportunity, because the big trend of having leased buildings means that you might not have the lease for very long. The kind of Capex, the cost of Capex is sizable, it's huge. So you either want to own the building or have a very long lease. You want to have confidence over the contracts that you're delivering for to make sure that you sweat that investment over a long period of time. And how the industry collaborates to deliver that is going to be really interesting. I don't know what the answer is.
No, and I think that's the point, that the many people that are involved in this industry and they're passionate about it, as clearly you are, is we don't know the answers, and it's about this future proof. I was doing a visit a few weeks ago and introduced to the concept of a warehouse hotel, which back in my day when I used to run was known as a general store, where many customers took the share of a larger. Now, as it happened, this was an automated warehouse hotel, and I was just thinking to myself and reflecting on the model of a large distributor stroke commercial entity. Everybody gets at least 2 or 3 visits from every day to the front door. If you look at how that model works, is that not the way the country will end up running at one point, where you have big DCs that are fed into and you have smaller vehicles delivering out on the hub and spoke model, because that's agile, it's quick, it's a low barrier to entry. And I think, going back to your point, is that going to be the solution? Because, the smaller vehicles are easier to electrify.
Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yeah, and they're better range. The technology's there now. Whether there's some big infrastructure investors that can invest in sort of shared facilities, I don't know how those would need to run. Whether they'd need to be sort of, dark facilities, which so that you don't have any visibility over other people's goods within them. But there's an opportunity there, and I think the industry's going to have to solve that, or perhaps a new type of offering within the sector to bring these things together. Maybe that'll be driven from the larger retailers. Maybe it'll be driven upwards.
And I think some of the larger retailers are starting to do that now, where they're actually buying some of these EV vehicles, and actually the person that's driving it is a old-fashioned words owner haulier, or it's a smaller organisation that they rent the vehicles to allow them to give them the flex within their supply chain. So I think, as in all things with business, that they will find, water finds its way down a hill and it finds the least path of resistance. So something will evolve and will develop without a doubt. But given all this ambiguity, and this is again probably an interesting question, be interesting your thoughts on this. What's your message to the operators who feel stuck and unsure what to focus on? So there's all this change, there's EV, there's cost pressures. What would you say to them is, what should their key area of focus be on? Notwithstanding scenario planning, but within that, what would you look at?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that actually, and I think a few minutes ago I mentioned about talking to their clients, and I suppose and the difference between all the end markets. Some will be delivering directly to major retailers or major manufacturing companies around the UK and overseas. others will be subcontracting for other major logistics firms. And I guess getting as close as you can to whoever you're supplying directly and understanding what's important to them would be a good starting point to that. Otherwise, looking at where the opportunities are to grow, why you've won and why you deliver or why you operate for the clients you do. Is it something niche that you offer, or your expertise, or your service levels, or your IT platform, or your location in the country? What is it that's really creating that USP for your business? I think that's the starting point. And then as leaders within the bank as well as outside, we always sort of talk about when you're very busy, you're in it, aren't you? You've got your sleeves rolled up and you're there. And I can imagine that a lot of business owners will be there, many days. We've got a lot of cost pressure. They've got an operational business to deliver. You've got vehicles, you've got people, you've got premises. Every day must be very full. And taking a step back from all of that and enabling the operation, even for a short space of time, to actually take yourself out of that, take a higher level view of what's going on. I think it's very tricky for us all these days when you've got so much information coming in, so many sort of data points, so many snippets of news and changes, that actually stepping back and looking at more of a 2 or 3 year horizon again, something a little bit longer term, sort of rebasing yourself with a framework to make decisions from. So, you're getting away from the day-to-day concern of, what will next week's cost increases be? What will next month's problem be? More of a, what am I trying to achieve over the next 2 or 3 years? Where do I see the fundamentals going? And if a client is committed to a certain industry or a certain client or a certain way of working, that reference point gives them a decision-making framework that then becomes a reference point. And then from that, you can try and draw some scenarios. What do they mean? What is the working capital required? Or, what was the output from that work?
And I think that's really, really, really good advice and opinion, because one of the things that we as a trade association, and I've said this to you, James, there's a lot of people and generations that have previously run their business like a lifestyle, and there's nothing wrong with a lifestyle type business, but actually there's nothing wrong with easy words and difficult to achieve, with looking at the next 2 or 3 years and saying, where is it we want to go ideally, how we're going to achieve it, and then speak to the experts, about how can that be financed, or what technology will be coming in. Which is why I think one of the, for me, the index of confidence that you produce is so important to the industry, only because it gives that sense, and it is representative of the industry. And if it can be achieved, it's about leaders and followers, and in times of uncertainty, people look to leaders. Some of that is AI generated now, is that advice that they get, and they get it from different ways. But I think one of the most important things is having a plan, having a direction, and then if that you can measure against. And just probably the final question is just from 85% of what's in this room came on a big truck at some point, and that's something that the Irish will always say, because it's true, and it will remain relatively well. It will remain true all the way through. Even with automation, automating trucks, it'll still be a big truck because of the bulk and because of everything else. Are there any other thoughts or any other observations that you've had from your experience over the years around, the logistics sector that we haven't discussed, that you'd just like to mention before we close?
I think looking at the successes and the trends of the markets that clients deliver to is really interesting, because you can see that when you go into people's warehouses and you can see the goods that they're taking and the routes that they're on. Is, if you're in ambient foods or furniture or pallets, or there are all of those different businesses have a very specific outlook on the end market that they're in. And I suppose trying to seek the trends and the patterns and the insight into that sector, I think, is really, really interesting, and it's where the opportunities lie. And I guess we heard a bit of that in some of our customer insights. We had insights from Expect, Pallet Line and Europa in this year's report, and they were starting to talk about a little bit about collaboration, a little bit about their own successes, a little bit about trading in Europe. they had all been investing in their own IT platforms. These are quite large businesses that with a bit of scale to do that. But they were, whilst because things are ambiguous, there's a lower level of Capex overall. It's really tricky because you can't stop investing in the future. The future is rolling along all of the time, and ever changing, and so those businesses are continuing on that path. So I think unless you have a way of sort of leveraging the balance sheet, it's finding those partners that can really help and work with you.
I think that comes back to the collaboration, working together theme, that's that we think, and then we're getting from talking to our members and members of the industry, and as trade associations. I think one of the essential things that we can do as trade associations is collaborate genuinely together. So we inform and be informed, and we help the conversation, whether it be directly with yourselves or directly with the membership, and carry the messages. Why it's always a pleasure and a genuine means to be involved in the Barclays Logistics Confidence Index, and we will include the link as part of this podcast where people can see it. And it's really important that people take time to look at those trends that you've spoken about, and actually more so now with the technology around us and the information available, it's quite easy to look at trends within different retail sectors or trends within other sectors, start to explore what potentially you could move into, and then think about the capital or the support that you need to get there. And I think in some ways we get quite pessimistic about the certainty, but there's never been a better way to actually scope out what your future plans might be. And there's never been more information available.
Well, from a confidence perspective, many clients will be getting ready. Their plans to invest or grow or buy something won't have gone away because confidence is slightly low. They'll be waiting for that certainty to return. And as we see as a bank, those customers will be ready. Whether that's in the new year or in the summer, but they'll be ready to go with their investment projects. Things might have paused very slightly, but all of those things will be ready. They'll be sort of in the building trade, you say shovel ready, but those projects will be shovel ready for whatever conditions they're waiting for to appear, and they'll get going with them.
Well, James, thank you very much this afternoon. It's been very insightful, and we look forward to the index for 2026, and hopefully you'll come back and we'll share that with us again, and we'll pick up on the points and see what's changed and what's developed, and the degree of optimism which I think we both sense is out there. We'll be able to start to see the green shoots of recovery grow. So thank you very much once again, and I appreciate the time this afternoon.